Thank you so much again, Maya, Tiester, Stephanie, Vasilis, and Nina. It was a bit overwhelming, but this is because Luma and elevation is a complex system and in various levels active. Thank you so much again for coming and being here. So, now, to your book, Hans Ulrich, I have a question. First of all, Ein Leben in Progress, a life in progress. What are you looking here? Do you remember what you're looking here?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of was a shoot somehow for Kaleidoscope some time ago, but it's actually a tribute to Alighiero Boetti because, as you know, Alighiero Boetti was really important for me when I was a teenager. I grew up in Switzerland. I was like 17. I went to see Fischli Weiss, and then we went on a school trip to Rome, and Fischli Weiss gave me Alighiero Boetti's number. So then you know.
And then he said to you, "You're like a typical Swiss. You speak so slow. Exactly. It's incredible. Yeah, exactly. You should speak faster." Exactly. And it seems like a joke today that he said that to you.
Yeah, it is really true. But then he also said I should ask artists about their unrealized projects and all of that. But particularly, you know, we talked about photocopy, and it's kind of fascinating because obviously Boetti was interested in this idea of getting his art outside the circuit of art. And it's deeply connected to the topic, really, of, you know, form and impact. He felt like that he was in very, very narrow boundaries, and he wanted to work with companies, which we then connected him, you know, with Museum in Progress. We created this puzzle exhibition. But he also really wanted to work with new media. This idea of, we have to think this is before 1989, so the World Wide Web was not invented by Tim Berners-Lee, but there was the fax machine. So Alighiero wanted to do a fax agency where basically his artworks could go to millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people by sending a fax every morning. But he also was obsessed by photocopy machines. And he famously, you know, had a photocopy machine which he got somehow from a sponsor. And he wanted to, first of all, photocopy himself. So he kept putting his head on a photocopy machine. All his friends had to put their head on a photocopy machine. And then one rainy day, he had this idea to put the photocopy machine in the garden to photocopy the rain. And so then, obviously, the photocopy machine stopped working.
Oh, okay. And to archive, you were born in Weinfelden as an only child, and 7-year-olds. You had a bad accident with a car who runs you over, and you had to spend several months in the hospital, paralyzed, traumatized, isolated. And you said that leads me to art. And when you recovered, you forced your parents to visit all the museums. You've seen the books of Chagall, of sort of grandmother of your family. And can you tell us more about Crisli and, no, not Crisli, your first archive in these chocolate box designed by Tinguely?
Yeah, thanks, Cristina, for this question, because it's kind of interesting because, you know, growing up in a household where art didn't play a role, my parents would not go to museums. The only place they would take me to was a kind of monastery library in St. Gallen. You know, how I could encounter art, and that connects also a lot to what we discussed yesterday, you know, when we talked about, I think it was Alvaro who said, you know, we need to kind of go beyond the doors. And I would never have encountered art if it wouldn't have been for all these things which happened outside the museum. So art arrived in our household through chocolates, you know, by Jean Tinguely, where I suddenly got interested in Tinguely as a teenager because there were these chocolates. You know, the art posters for the Montreux Festival. Pierre Keller was really important in Switzerland because he somehow early on understood, I mean, he's behind the ECAL also, one of the really leading art schools, design schools in the world, which he put on the map. But he also early on understood that we need to bring art to the people. So he, you know, got Keith Haring to do posters for Montreux. And in a way, you know, on the timetable of the train, Switzerland, I was always an artist. I remember, you know, Claude Sandeau, and then I went to visit this artist, became the first studio visit. But in a way, the very first time I encountered art was in the streets of Zurich. Because, you know, growing up in a village, in a small town, you know, in the eastern part of Switzerland, my parents would always go like on Saturdays to buy, stuff you couldn't find in the village, in Zurich. And there was this artist who was actually selling flowers on Bahnhofstrasse called Hans Krüsi. And he just had a retrospective in Kartause Ittingen in Switzerland. He's very famous now, but he was very interesting because he basically it connects also to Uman. He had an amazing dialogue with animals. He had conversations with cows. And he recorded his conversations with animals, it's kind of like, almost like Andy Warhol. He recorded everything, these amazing audio cassettes. But he wasn't, an artist. He was, in a way, working in farms. He made a living by selling flowers in Bahnhofstrasse. But he made these extraordinary drawings of cows. And he also observed in summer and winter, when the farmers would bring the cows to the mountains, and then in autumn they would take them down again. And so he realized that all these cows wouldn't fit on a painting. So he created cinemas, like long, you could with your hands turn, and then you could for like a long time see these cow processions. And he would sell these, drawings in the streets of Zurich. And that's really the first encounter I had with art. And then, of course, at the same time in the 80s, we mentioned him earlier today, there was Harald Nägeli, the sprayer of Zurich, who is now very old. He still lives in Zurich, an extraordinary artist, friend of Joseph Beuys, who was mentioned a lot, in terms of social sculpture. And Nägeli during the 80s, he was arrested many times. He basically did all these street art in Zurich, these graffitis. And he did it again during the lockdown. It was amazing when, actually during the lockdown, he created these really, in a way, graffitis of death. They were like a death ritual.
Can I again come back to the archive? Because when you went to the gymnasium in Kreuzlingen, you passed a house which was derelict, a sort of ghost house, and one of your teachers, Binswanger, in fact, told you about it, and that Abi Warburg was there as a patient several times. And that was maybe the archive jumping out of the praline box of Tinguely and became major.
Yeah, something happened then, because basically this haunted house, there were no people in there. It was always empty. And one day I asked the teacher, in Kreuzlingen at the lycée, at the school, what this house was. And he basically said that it was the former clinic of Professor Binswanger, who is basically had a clinic there. And he told me that the art historian Abi Warburg, legendary art historian, was treated there. And actually, it's there where he wrote his famous book, The Serpent Ritual, which he presented for the first time as a lecture to the patients, of Binswanger's clinic. So I started to kind of, as a teenager, search for Binswanger information. I had to go to library, again, it was pre-internet, and find the Mnemosyne Atlas of, text about the Mnemosyne Atlas. So I started to kind of create these cardboard panels in my room, which I had as a child in my parents' home. And I started to buy thousands of postcards, and started to create in boxes, but also on these panels, my kind of first museum. So it was the kind of beginning of curating, I suppose.
Yes, and then the first studio visit, in fact, was Fischli Weiss in the 90s, where they just filmed the Lauf der Dinge. What is it in English?
The way things go, right? Yeah.
The racing school, which was filmed actually in one of our companies in Altstetten at Luva, not Luma, Luva. Okay, then can you tell us about this, the epiphany you had there? Definitely.
Yeah, so I came to Luva and then basically saw this alchemy, of this film. Pio Corradi was shooting the film, and it was a sort of a chain reaction. And the amazing chain reaction became a chain reaction for me, because I kind of decided that day that I wanted to go kind of, almost live in artist studios and then make myself somehow useful. Because obviously the question became, what could I do for art? And all of that happened in that one day. Sometimes one can sort of, can be like a quantum leap. When one has an encounter, it can replace years of, of preparing. And so then, but the really amazing thing happened a few weeks later, because I had just made my driver's license, and then Fischli Weiss had this problem with the snowman.
The model of the snowman.
Yeah, so then, they had to basically, the snowman, which many of you, I'm sure, have seen at Bayer, had to somehow, a maquette had to be brought to Saarbrücken, to Caspar Koenig, because it was the deadline of the jury for this public art commission. And basically, Fischli Weiss rang me and they said, we know you just last week made your driver's license. Could you borrow the car of your father and mother and basically bring this dummy, to Saarbrücken? And so then, I went to Fischli Weiss's studio in Louvain and, put this dummy on the seat,
driver's seat
side, and they fixed with the safety belt. So it would happen, and so I drove the night to Saarbrücken, and there on the bridge, Caspar Koenig was waiting for me, and it became another kind of life-changing encounter. But it kind of again very much connects to the topic of E.A.T, and to the topic of also art in public space. Because of course, in that first meeting with Caspar, I learned everything about Münster. I learned about the importance that we bring art to people, into communities who might not have art. That sort of whole idea of Caspar's vision, for this public art project. And I remember also Katharina Fritsch was there, who also did a remarkable work, in Münster, because it had all to do with energy. It actually, in an amazing way, kind of connects. I mean, we began the conversation this afternoon with, Uman telling us about Marina Abramovic, whose, absolute inspiration is Tesla. We then talked a lot about energy, of course, in connection to Luma, also in terms of, environment, and in a way, had then Nina telling us about Tesla. So all dots seem to connect.
And then you started to crisscrossing Europe, 30 cities, 30 days. Amongst Rosemary Trockel was also crucial because she told you should not only look at living young artists, but at older living artists. That made you then go to Maria Lasning.
Yeah, so basically that's every artist gave me a task in a way, and that still happens today a lot. I kind of want to be useful to artists, so then artists gave me a task, so Boetti, the unrealized project, and then Rosemary Trockel said, she was very irritated, rightly so, that in a way there were so many forgotten, foremost also female artists, and she said, it was the moment when Louise Bourgeois started to be well known, but she said so many other artists. She said you should really go to every city you visit and just say, who are pioneering artists, and particularly also focus on female artists. So I applied that methodology for the first time in Vienna, because I took a night train. All these trips were by night train. And then would ask, met all these young artists at that time, and they would all basically say, go to Maria Lasnik. So I rang Maria Lasnik, and she was surprised that a teenager wanted to see her. And we spent an afternoon together. And then obviously, a lot of things started to happen with Maria Lasting, and it's incredibly exciting that now we are working with Vassilis, with Arthur Fure, on a show we curate for Maya, for Luma. That will be the next archive exhibition, because we have so many, correspondences, because in a way, it was fascinating, because at a certain moment, Maria Lasnik, was... it was a time where we still had letter writings. She wrote me these really long letters.
Which were published?
Yeah, there was also a book of them, and she felt kind of like that she was very irritated about photography. She really didn't like photography. So she started to have this sort of whole discussion about that art can go where photography cannot go. It can go into our neurons, paint. She felt that it can go inside, in a way where photography can't go. So it'd be fascinating to see this whole discussion in Arles, in the context where photography plays such an important role. We be a part of.
And then crucial to you, before the first exhibition you did with Boltanski and the kitchen exhibition you did, you went to Paris to Boltanski. Could you say what he suggested you to do?
Yeah, so Boltanski basically gave me another advice. Also, Annette Messager needs to be mentioned, because I visited them together, and they told me that we need to sort of come up with exhibitions which invent a new rule of the game, which are sort of new formats, things which have never happened. And that, of course, has a lot to do with what we discussed this afternoon, when Maya talked about this idea in the prefiguration of Arles, but also now, what's going to happen this summer with the second chapter of the Barlow exhibition, that is still, a lot related to this idea that we think about how exhibitions can be different rules of the game, how we use space, different rules of the game, of the temporality. I mean, the summer exhibition changed title, artist gave it a title. So it's kind of really funny now, because if you read the reviews of the summer exhibition of Barlow last summer, every review has another title, so it's very confusing. And in a way, Boltanski talked about unexpected locations, and that would be the first time then the kitchen, So then he said,
a kitchen in your student apartment in St. Gallen, where 29 visitors came, which was, as I understand, curated by Fischli Weiss, with large, because there was in your kitchen there was no food, no nothing. Even in the fridge there was stocked with books, and so they had to take out all the books and bought you large bottles of ketchup and cans and things. So 29 people came, among them Jean Tinguely. And you wanted to drive him to the airport, and could you tell that story, how he ended up?
Yeah, I kind of stopped driving because I was a terrible driver. So now I take, I don't take the train. But in a way, at that time, I drove, and it was a kind of a little bit of a misadventure because we ran out of fuel and then spent hours on the highway, and he missed his plane. Anyway, it was really great because we got time to talk. And anyway, the kitchen exhibition had only 29 visitors, so it became a rumor. So, it's also interesting that it's not necessarily because an exhibition has many visitors that it has an impact. It can also be, it can travel differently, I mean, some of the early performances, legendary performances, were seen by very few people, but they're art history today. So exhibitions can travel in many different ways. But then, as we had spent so much time with Jean Tinguely, we had to take a hotel, we kind of missed the plane. It was a misadventure, then we had dinner. And then, based on that, he invited me to the E.A.T Foundation to get this residency. And Marie-Claude Beau just passed away, and we need to remember her here tonight today, because the E.A.T Foundation at that time, it was really an early model of such a campus, where things can happen in a very interdisciplinary way. And it was sort of interesting because one would one evening, encounter a poet, another evening, I don't know, Issey Miyake and Yamamoto would be there, another evening, Hélène Sixo or Paul Virilio would be there, and then, of course, artists were there, and they had this residency also, and I was for the first time in a big city, in Paris, and I made so many, studio visits. So it was an amazing possibility, for really a life-changing possibility. Yeah.
I jump a bit, and then came the second exhibition at the Carlton, where obviously 2,000 people came, and can you say about how it added up an artist would leave?
Yeah, I always believe that when that we don't have to wait for in terms of curating, for opportunities, to be invited to do something, but that we can create these opportunities, and I think that should never stop, because I think it's not about filling spaces, but it's about showing in spaces, according to necessities. And it's also about convincing people in society, if you want to have an impact, it's very often about finding situations in society where maybe art doesn't happen, and in a similar way, when Maya came up with the idea that we did the arena, it's a very unexpected idea to suddenly do in the arena in Arles a contemporary art show. And it was kind of the case with this hotel, because we wanted to do an exhibition in a hotel room, because it was this whole idea that artists who live in hotels. Raymond Ins was my neighbor there. He lived for years, the Desaffichiste, and Bertrand Lavien and Gloria Friedman lived in these hotels. It was a kind of an artist hotel. And I rented the room there for several months and started to basically invite artists to visit me and do a piece in the hotel room. So
Nile Toroni was the first.
Yeah, he was the first one, and then Annette Messager came and put, a stuffed animal on the bed, and then many artists added, layers. And so after about a month and a half, we had 70 artworks. And the hotel didn't really understand what was happening. They thought it's strange that this, guest has so many visitors. They kind of were a bit suspicious. They didn't really know. And then, one day I explained to the hotel that now many more people are going to come, because we kind of send out an invitation card, and it was too late to stop it. And obviously, as opposed to the kitchen show, it's very much an intimate room. Paris was a bigger city, so thousands of people started to come, and I gave everybody a guided tour. So it was a very nice way of arriving in Paris because I had lots of friends afterwards. I wasn't lonely anymore. It was nice.
And then Suzanne Paget gave you a small office in the Musée d'Art Moderne. That's the time we met for brutally early breakfast, conceiving this idea of the Engadin Art Talks somehow. But could you tell me about the exhibition? Have you been involved with Remi Zaug Giacometti then? What is that time?
Yeah, then basically I had never really done anything in a museum, and then Suzanne gave me this first job, and that was the idea. It's again connected to Switzerland because she says, you're Swiss, and so, you should go and visit all the people who still knew Giacometti, because she did this big Giacometti show with Remi Zaug, and so she gave me a list and says, just visit all these people, and it was basically, Bice Kuriger, I talked to Bice about Meret Oppenheim because Meret Oppenheim had passed away, but then we went to see Balthus, who was of course friendly with Giacometti, and the surrealist Matta was still alive, and many more people. And we started I also suggested that we ask some more contemporary artists who were inspired by Giacometti. So Franz West was always very inspired by what he called the long, thin figures. And so this became the first work in the context of a museum. Yeah.
And this snowball grew to an avalanche, and Kaspar Koenig asked you for the Broken Mirror to take part in the Broken Mirror, which was in Vienna, your first large museum show, right?
Yeah, that was then kind of learning on the job of doing, and then we again thought, because it was a large-scale exhibition, and there we thought, how could we actually again do what we felt is so important, to bring the exhibition to the people in the city. So we worked with Museum in Progress and with artists to actually create gigantic billboards, so that basically, the painting show became, a citywide exhibition on kind of all the
jumping back, exhibition out of the box. You did the exhibition about Robert Walser in Gais, and so many others like Luis Barragan in Mexico City, with Isabella Mora, Garcia Lorca in Granada, and Lino Bobardi in Sao Paulo. I attended, which was a wonderful exhibition. Could you tell about one of these, maybe?
Yeah, so then, obviously this idea of doing exhibition in house museums kind of, became a series, and, amazing things can happen in houses. And I've always been inspired by, that scale, in a way, of exhibitions. The Serpentine is a formal, tea house. Amazing experiments can happen in houses. Maya invited Laura Owens to kind of do a whole project in a house in Arles that became a sort of a residency in a house. And Alvaro was in that exactly, became a sort of a layered exhibition. So a lot of things, can happen in houses. Probably has to do also with the experience in the kitchen. I never wanted to lose that experience. Also when I started to have bigger spaces, like the Broken Mirror was on thousands of square meters, but I didn't want to lose that more intimate experience of a show and make that public. And so we started to make a series in house museums, and we just would go and talk to the people. So for example, with Carith Wynne Evans, we went to speak to the Soanes Museum in London. Who of you have been in the Sir John Soanes house? Who hasn't been? It's really incredible. It's a 19th century museum, like a super dense museum where Sir John Soanes had a studio, but also a collection. And so we just basically presented ourselves, and we said we would love to do a show there, and they said yes. And I think there is such a potential that we can just go into society and do exhibition in unexpected locations, which we can use. And we did this then, as you said with Isabella, in the Lina Bobardi house. We did it also in the Barragan house in Mexico City, in the Lorca house in Granada. And it's a kind of an ongoing series every couple of years. Artists love it. Artists love to do special works, for these houses, and in a way reactivate the house and give it a new life.
Then you changed from Paris to the Serpentine, right? And early on, you asked Ben Vickers because you thought it's needed. What was the exhibition called? You met him. Take Me, I'm Yours. Yes. Could you tell you about Ben Vickers' relation and how that started?
Yeah, so Julia Peter-Johns invited me to join the Serpentine in 2006, and one of the main things I found very interesting was this idea of the pavilion, because the Serpentine started with Zaha Hadid in 2000, these pavilions, and this idea that you have basically in the park an architectural structure, building architecture every year without doors, and where just hundreds of thousands of people by accident can discover these structures. And initially it was very well-known architects, and then we started to work with younger architects over the couple of years because we realized it's a platform where we can actually enable younger architects to work. And then obviously, it was the first time also I started to be, responsible for an institution. Before I was a curator, and then I was co-director and later artistic director. And then I thought it would be interesting actually to think structurally about what we can change in an institution. And I obviously was always very inspired by John Latham and Barbara Stevini, two very important figures for this topic also of the Engadin Art Talks system, because obviously they started the art displacement group and this idea that we think about, bringing art into society. So that became one thing, that we wanted to do civic projects and bring art into the context of, not only the Serpentine but society. The Edgware Road project we discussed yesterday with Suzanne Hefuna is an example for that. And then with Ben Vickers, we decided to do a second new department, which is basically a department of technology 12 years ago. So we started, obviously AI is a huge topic now, but it was already a nation topic then. So we started to work with AI. We started to build, and now, it's really for Bettina Korek and me and our teams. It's run now by Kay Watson and 5 curators. This whole department can now produce video games. We can produce exhibitions like the one of Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, with AI, and in a way produce, reality, but also hopefully useful things for other institutions, because we have these reports we do every year and people can download them. It's open source. And, we hope that it's also useful for institutions who don't have a tech department. And then the third new department is, of course, this whole idea of a department for ecology. The idea of thinking, that the 21st century institution needs new departments, not just the usual organigram of an art institution, no? And new, and of course then the next step can even be that there are, new institutions born, which is what, for example, Maya was telling us about Atelier Luma. That's a completely, new institution, and I think there's also a huge potential for that institutions can produce new institutions in a way. Yeah.
Maybe it's late. Few questions, one sentence answers.
Okay.
What advice would you give to a young curator?
I mean, it's difficult in one sentence, but it's to be close to artists. It all grows out of conversations with artists. That would be the main thing, but there's many, many more things.
Okay. Who is an artist who, many artists have been inspiration to you, but who is an artist, living or dead, who inspired you very much? From the point of view of the arts.
We spoke about many artists already at the beginning, all these artists who were inspiring for me at the beginning, but I think I want to answer it with sort of turning the question around. In a way, a huge influence came from outside the art world as well. I think it's interesting that we can be inspired by other fields, right? So when I met Jonas Freeman, he explained to me that we don't need just to have top-down master plans, but that we need to have bottom-up, self-organized elements in cities. So then I thought, wow, we can apply that to curation. Curating is always a checklist, top-down. Can we actually have bottom-up, bring self-organization to curatorial model? Or Itel Adnan would say, we have to learn to listen again. And she said, curation should be about listening, and things like that. So I would say Edouard Glissant, became the ultimate, in a way, encounter of my life, from whom I learned so much. So I would say, interestingly enough, we sometimes can learn a lot when we step outside our field.
Right.
Which is also why we need interdisciplinary art schools.
And I would like to end with the classic questions. I borrow from you. What is your unrealized project or your dream come true?
Yeah, so there is a long list. Basically, one is because I think it's true that with curators it's almost like with architects. One has long lists of unrealized projects, certain public art competitions where one contributes projects which are not realized. But I think one unrealized project is definitely, I've recorded about 3,000 or 4,000 conversations with artists about their unrealized projects. And I always wanted to do a kind of an agency and a big exhibition of many of these unrealized projects. I think the world should know more about it, and that could help that some of these projects get realized. And that, unfortunately, has in a way, remained an unrealized project. So that's definitely something I want to do.
And also post-it. Or does it exist, a post-it book already?
Yeah,
you ask with the handwriting, you ask the artist to write a sentence on a
yeah, that's
post-it.
kind of more realized, because that's kind of like the idea of a movement, on Instagram, where we wanted to kind of, again, I got a task, this time from E.A.T, the poet, and from Umberto Eco. They said, you must do something to save handwriting. And then for months I had no idea, and I thought I can use Instagram for something which is not kind of, it wasn't planned to be it's an image sharing platform, but I could sort of make a détournement and use it for handwriting. And so it's become a project where every kind of week we post, I post a couple of handwritten notes. We're going to post next week. Uman wrote a fantastic, post-it today, so that will be a post, and many more also from the last couple of days. And indeed, yeah, the idea is at a certain moment to publish them all. So far there's a small book can be published, but the idea is to one day publish them all. That's also unrealized, yeah.
And have you realized already Cadavre Exquise?
Yeah, that was an exhibition in with Hila Stadler in Switzerland. We did a book on that. But I want to say something at the end and just thank you, Cristina, and Dale, and also the amazing team here, because I think you've all done such an amazing job organizing this. And we should give you all a big round of applause.